Today, we've assembled a really incredible group to present on the 2024 Performance Enablement Report findings and to join us for a panel discussion today. Our panelists include Tamara Chandler of PeopleWise, formerly with Ernst & Young's People Advisory Service Practice, Deanna LaPierre, Senior Director of and Global Head of Talent Development for LivePerson, and Tracy Dodd, a member of the Betterworks HR Advisory Board and a former Chief Talent Officer. We'll be hearing more about and from our panelists during the discussion portion of today's webinar. But let's go ahead and dive into the report. The State of Performance Enablement is an independent research report that we run annually. The report is aimed at capturing the sentiment of the workforce through the lens of how they feel enabled to perform at their best. This report is specifically tailored to HR professionals and business leaders who are seeking to enhance their workforce, to optimize performance, and foster organizational agility through modern performance management strategies. And today, we're privileged to have Michelle Glaudsberry, one of my colleagues and the driving force behind this year's research, walk us through some of the key findings. And so with that, let me turn things over to Michelle.
All right, thanks, Ashley, and hello, everyone. I am going to share with you the highlights of this year's report that tells the story of the big disconnect, which is the main theme that emerged from this year's survey. There are big gaps in the experience of leaders, including HR leaders, compared to employees in how they experience performance management and support. And we believe that these threaten to undermine the very things that organizational leaders seek, namely productivity, retention, and the achievement of strategic business goals. But there is a way to bridge those gaps. If we can advance the slide. Thanks. So there were 6 key findings in all, but I will tell this as the tale of 4 gaps: the perception gap, the guidance gap, the technology gap, and the skills gap. If companies can manage to bridge these, they are well on their way to achieving the workforce transformation needed to meet the challenges of building skills to harness Gen AI, the breakneck crazy speed of change, and the expectations of employees. So let's go ahead and take a look at the first gap, the perception gap. What is this? Well, this is the disconnect between how leaders perceive the effectiveness of their own performance management versus how employees view and respond to performance management. If you can advance, thank you. So anyone who's traveled to the London Underground, I was there this past summer, is very familiar with the mind the gap warning to make people aware of the discrepancies between the trains and the platforms, which can be hazardous. Leaders also have a gap in their perception that they need to be mindful of. Nearly 9 in 10, including HR leaders, see their own performance management as successful. But among employees, the number drops 32 points. And we think this indicates some ivory tower thinking. Leadership really needs to step into the lived experiences of their employees, find out what's not working, why, and how to improve it, rather than assume because it's good for them or they think everything is going well, that it's good for everyone else. And this is really critical because performance management affects every aspect of what an employee does and how they feel about their work. If employees don't feel empowered to perform at their best, if they don't feel that they're fairly evaluated and recognized for their efforts and able to advance their skills and careers, that's when a company starts moving toward disengagement, which lowers productivity and increases retention problems. So let's drill down a little bit more into this perception gap. Compared to HR and leadership, individual contributors are 37% less likely to feel performance enabled. They're 17% less likely to feel that they're productive, and they're 3 times less likely to feel supported in developing their skills. If we could, thank you. More than 2 in 5 employees say their performance management is a failure. It was about 44%, actually. And look at what happens to sentiment when employees have a negative view of their performance management. Looking there on the right side of the column. These negative sentiments are more than just a workforce problem, they're a business problem. The stat isn't shown here, but I do want to call attention to the fact that what we found in this year's survey is that feelings of high productivity jump 31% when performance management is seen as successful. So on the right side are the sentiments that you want. On the left side are the sentiments you want. All systems failing. The only positive sentiment there is productivity, which is that employees are still trying to do the work, even though they don't feel good about the work itself. So let's dive into the second finding, which is the guidance gap. So this has an employee component and a manager component. So let's consider the employee guidance gap first. What we found is that for individual contributors, and even among those with performance management, 1 in 5 employees is not getting regular one-to-one conversations with their manager for performance and career development. And 2 in 5 do not receive peer feedback, even though both of these are game changers for optimizing performance, productivity, and retention.
Absolutely. And Michelle, I just wanted to jump in because even though I work with HR leaders every day in my role, I'm also a manager and I've been an individual contributor. And I can't agree with this statement more. Managers provide the coaching and feedback employees need to stay engaged and grow in their career. And I want to tie this to something that's been coming up in a lot of my conversations with HR leaders, which is about skills and how these conversations really connect to upskilling. These manager check-ins and these performance conversations really seem to be the place where skill conversations happen, where skill proficiency is discussed and where new skills are identified to be pursued in order to help employee development and also further company goals. And it seems to me that these frequent manager-employee conversations are becoming even more critical to a successful talent strategy for a company and for its employees.
Very true, very true. And the reality is that employees without meaningful and ongoing manager conversations about their performance and development and without regular feedback feel 3 times less performance enabled than their peers who have these conversations. So that speaks to productivity. They are more than 3 times less able to always grow their skills, which speaks to both productivity and retention. And they are 3 times less likely to feel they have an internal path for advancing their careers, which is an indication of retention. So frequent, and regular conversations just can't be a nice to have. With cross-functional teams, asynchronous work, and the need for businesses to be agile, they are a must-have because these conversations and feedback enable employees to stay on track, know what they're doing right, and where they need to make corrections. And regular conversations and feedback are the most effective way to address bottlenecks, remove roadblocks, and enable employees to continuously improve. So let's move on to the guidance gap for managers because there is one there too. Middle managers are really the bridge between leadership's vision and strategic direction and the execution of these by employees. These managers also help their teams and individual contributors remain on track and engaged, and they can provide guidance and break down roadblocks that can hamper effectiveness and productivity. Yet we continue to find an underinvestment in managers coupled with being squeezed from above and below by the high expectations of leaders and employees. And this threatens to undermine the foundational support they provide. Our research found that 2 of every 3 managers don't understand what they're supposed to do in their role, so they lack clarity. 2 of 3 say they need support for delivering performance management effectively. And 2 of 3 need support guiding employees on career and skills development. Because managers are so squeezed, they have developed some workarounds. Some of them are good, some of them not so good. And the ones that may not be so good include having more team meetings and fewer one-on-ones and spending less time on qualitative feedback. So these things can be very harmful to employees. Organizations, we think, can provide better guidance to managers and thus employees by providing better manager training and development and by giving managers templates and tools that promote meaningful performance and development conversations. Companies can also improve manager efficiency and lighten the manager's load by training them on AI tools that foster both a positive manager-employee experience while also reducing workloads. Let's move on to the third gap, the technology gap. 2/3 of companies, and again, we interviewed companies with 1,000 employees or more. So almost everybody has an HCM. And 2/3 of companies use an HCM or ERP for performance-related activities. But the data shows that these systems perform little to no better than manual approaches like using spreadsheets. And in 1 or 2 cases, HCMs actually perform worse than manual approaches, according to the survey data. And we found that this year and last year as well. Overall, the data shows that HCMs are 70% more effective with the addition of a purpose-built performance management solution. So when we look across manager conversations, peer feedback, ratings and reviews, goal management, and career and skills development, all the major components of a performance management system, the combination of an HCM plus a purpose-built performance management platform shows an improvement of 30 to 40 percentage points for each activity. And we actually averaged those, and that's where we got that 70% number. So what is the impact on outcomes and employee sentiment when employees see performance management processes as a success versus a failure? So I'm just going to share a few of the findings. There were several more in the report. Respondents using a purpose-built performance management solution with HCMs versus those using HCMs only for performance management reported 11% higher engagement, were 77% more likely to feel that their goals were relevant and aligned with their company's needs, and they were 96% more likely to feel their career development was on track. So you can see the chain reaction of modern performance management of that approach that you find with purpose-built solutions. Now, the report also had a separate finding on goals, but I want to touch on sentiments around goal relevancy briefly. Employees are much more likely to see their goals as relevant to the business when goals are set in an integrated system, meaning an HCM plus a purpose-built. So what is the impact of business outcomes when goals are aligned? Well, employees whose goals are in sync with their company goals are 24% more productive and 4.5 times more satisfied with their manager interactions. That is to say, the conversations, the coaching, and the feedback that they receive from their managers. Let's move briefly, if we can, to the fourth gap, which is a skills gap. And again, there is another section on this, a complete section in the report. I'm only going to touch on it briefly here. But if we if we can move to the next slide, with Gen AI, nearly every business is focused on how to upskill and how to do it properly. So skills really are the new currency of work. But of the 86% of employees who want career and skills development, just over half are satisfied with what their companies are providing. So here again, we see a sizable gap between HCM only versus a combination of HCM and purpose-built. Employees are more than twice as likely to see a path forward for developing their careers, and they're 3 times more likely to feel that they're getting the right support for building those skills. Best of breed performance management systems are one of the best sources to provide the coaching needed for skills development and to collect both quantitative and qualitative skills data to drive employee development. Right now, this data is scattered among different HR systems. Betterworks, I will mention, is already in the process of building a talent profile that will help organizations gain a holistic view of employee skills. And that, when combined with coaching for skill development and building that into a performance development plan, a performance management plan, will help drive the right kind of skill development and skill mastery rather than just looking to see if an employee has skills. This will be able to help employees develop the skills that they need for the business and do so efficiently and to succeed in doing so with coaching from the manager. So that's a quick overview of the findings. I encourage everyone to download the full report. I believe it's linked here below in the content section. And you can spend some time looking at all the findings. And we also have recommendations and some customer success stories as well in the report. And so with that, I will throw it back to Ashley and our panel.
Hello. Thank you so much, Michelle. I noticed there was a question about whether or not there would be a transcript available to get more information about some of these resources. My recommendation would be to go into the docs section and download that full PER report, where you can find all the information written out with more detail, more information about statistics around sample sizes and response and survey response sizes. I think that's probably the most helpful place to go. And with that, I want to turn things over and start talking to our panelists. I know that, they have been listening to all of these different sections, and they have a lot to say on their lived experiences. Before we dive into the first question, I'd love to take a moment and just introduce each one of our panelists in a little bit more detail. So I'm going to start with Tamara Chandler, who is an internationally recognized thought leader, author, and speaker known for developing new and effective ways for people and organizations to perform at their peak. She's the author of 2 books. The first one, Performance Management is Killing Performance and What to Do About It. And the second is Feedback and Other Dirty Words, Why We Fear It, How to Fix It. After serving as a principal partner in Ernst & Young's People Advisory Service practice, she started her own consultancy, PeopleWise. Tracy Dodd has worked in financial services, fintech, software, luxury retail, and healthcare, helping organizations maximize their talent and culture through practical and agile people strategies. She's a member of the Betterworks HR Advisory Board, and she most recently served as Chief Talent Officer at Kyndryl. She also held talent strategy leadership roles at Tiffany & Co. and MasterCard, along with several VP roles at JP Morgan and Chase. Finally, Deanna LaPierre is the Senior Director, Global Head of Talent Development for LivePerson, a Betterworks customer. LiveCustomer is a global leader in delivering AI-powered conversations between brands and consumers, and it was most recently named one of the most innovative AI companies in the world by Fast Company. Dina has over 3 decades of experience driving implementation of programmatic solutions such as leadership development, employee upskilling, and engagement programs to align talent and culture to top-level organizational goals. So we're so glad to have all of you here today and really excited to dig into these conversations. So let's get started. I know our first question is around the fact that organizations have many competing priorities and initiatives. So I'm curious to hear from you, in your opinion, where does performance management rank in the constellation of what companies need to focus on strategically?
You want me to go?
Yeah, why don't you kick things off?
Okay. Thanks, everybody. So excited to be here. This is a question I love because it's always where I think it's important to start, is why address performance management, or address the thing we used to call performance management that maybe we should call something else. But the idea is that this is the process that sits at the heart of the employee's experience. It connects them to the strategy. It reinforces, if done right, the culture of the organization. It helps people understand how work gets done and the structure and the ways of working of the organization, because it reinforces that. And most important, it helps people when done right, as it shows in the report, to help grow and advance and to really understand how their work is meaningful to the organization. These are the things, if you think about what drives human performance, it's those things of connection and meaning, and having clarity about the work that I do and how that work has an impact. That's what people really, really care about. And so when we do performance management right, we drive all of those factors. And when we drive those factors, we drive engagement, we drive connection. You know, as your report shows, we drive productivity and better outcomes for everybody.
I think that's very true. Thank you, Tamara. Tracy, I think when we were prepping for this call, you had some interesting things to say as well. I'd love to hear from you.
Sure. Well, I think Tamara summarized that really, really well. I think to build on that, I would say that performance management, where it ranks in the constellation of what companies need to focus on, is probably in the top 3. It has a significant impact on culture. It is at the heart of what employees experience on a day-to-day basis. They have that direct relationship with their manager. Are they getting the coaching and the feedback that they need? Are they talking about their career? Are they building their skills? Are they receiving opportunities for career growth and advancement? All of those things that, as you've pointed out in the report, have a significant impact on employee engagement, employee experience, and productivity. So it's absolutely something that organizations should focus on. I think that there has been a lot of trends that have taken over the conversation, around ratings, no ratings. And I think we've lost sight of the importance of the day-to-day experience and the conversations that should be happening between managers and employees, whether those conversations are informal or formal. That is at the heart of performance management. It's less about the process, and it's more about the human connection and the experience and the conversations between employees, peers, and employees and their managers.
Absolutely. And I know that different industries are having different experiences right now based on their little microeconomic conditions. Some are more stressed, some are in a place of extra talent. But one of the things that I found in talking with HR leaders is, regardless of if you are in a talent desert, if you are in a hiring freeze, or if you are in a place where there is high churn among very specialized skill sets, these performance conversations are what drive engagement and what drive retention and performance. And so regardless of where you are, focusing on performance and performance enablement is always a lever that you can push to drive employee retention, to drive productivity, and to help take any performer and turn them into a top performer. That's really wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, our next question is a little bit closer, focusing on how do we actually build on those conversations, and how do we support the managers having them? It's been pretty well documented that performance management continues to be a stumbling block for many organizations, even those who have made changes to their approaches in recent years, embracing ratings versus no ratings or continuous performance management practices. What are the practical steps that companies can take, or what are the ideal steps that companies can take to bridge the disconnects that they're experiencing in developing a strong performance management process? And let's start with Deanna.
Yeah, absolutely. Performance management is a stumbling block because it can be really time consuming for managers and for employees, and what is always seemingly a busy time of the year. And no matter what time of the year you want to do it, it's always a busy time of the year. And it's also a complicated issue because you're relying on the capabilities of managers to create this really important documentation, because it's that documentation that you're using to make, I'll call them human capital decisions. And so you're relying on that. And everywhere I've worked, performance ratings come into play when you're making those decisions. And I can also say that there's also the experience that the employee has, where sometimes if the manager isn't delivering the performance discussion in a certain way, it's disengaging, and that's not at all what we want. And much like what Tracy was saying, it really drives engagement if it's done well. So you're looking at writing skills, you're looking at experience for the employees, you're looking at just managers' ability and time. And so how to bridge that is a really great question. I've read a lot of articles on this. I've been managing performance assessments, performance management for decades. And so I've read a lot of articles along the way. I've seen a lot of different ways of doing this. And I even worked for an organization that said, we're not even going to have performance evaluations. And while that was a good feeling for managers of like, hey, I got all this time back, and also for employees of not having a conversation that demoralizes them, there was still an issue of, how does this company equitably award merit increases or make those decisions that are promotions, reductions in force? And what I can say is this year, I'm really proud of what we put in place, because we did a pretty great job at bridging that gap, because we gathered stakeholder feedback of what would you be looking for, manager, for a performance process. We leveraged a lot of research. Sometimes the research is contrary to one another, much like you said, ratings, no ratings, reviews, no reviews. So there's lots of different models that are out there. But with all that we had, we knew that we needed to create a really light lift. And so this small but mighty project team that I was leading came up with a process that was really positive for employees. And one was to make the questions that we asked really just easy for people to tick a box. And we created these 11 components of performance and asked people to then use non-numerical ratings in order to measure what they believed that they did. And then managers had the same components. We also were customers of Betterworks, and we turned on that AI as soon as we could for AI Assist. And that helped in this optional narrative section where managers could write what they felt, and then the AI would help to synthesize that and make it maybe less aggressive, if you will, and also make it more appropriate. Trust me, we tested it pretty hard to see what it would do. And the outcome of this was great because in addition to all of that, we also added some optional questions that allowed for employees to say what they needed from their managers and the managers to read that. And we gave them a list of things and an optional fill in the blank. But managers would be told what they need from their employees. And I think that's a big miss, that sometimes the employee is too frightened to say, hey, I need this. And the manager is unaware that I need you to come in and remove roadblocks. I need you to come in and, make sure that we have a consistent one-on-one every month, every 2 weeks, every week. And as a result of what we did from this feedback process for the year end, number one, we had a lot of employees saying this is the most meaningful performance review I've ever had. And I thought, wow, I've been doing this a long time and nobody's ever said that. We've had managers saying, you listened to me. This didn't take me forever to do. It didn't take me a full day to write one. And so there was happiness around that. And also, I think the biggest indicator that we might be onto something is that we had a number of managers who said, hey, I really like this tool. What else can it do? And so now we have all these pilot programs of launching a 360 process, the development conversation, a really deep one, as well as an employee experience check-in. So that's to name a few.
That's amazing. I mean, what I'm really hearing from you is that as you thought about your performance management process and your strategy, you really thought about it from the very beginning of how does performance management fit into talent development, into succession planning, into compensation, into development paths for each of my employees. And you thought about a structure so that your performance review process could fit into that and flow into each one of those in an informed way. What I'm also hearing is that you used the performance management process to also solicit feedback from managers and from employees about what they needed to feel supported. And so it wasn't just a review of an individual, it was also a feedback opportunity for your HR team to learn more in order to better prepare and better support employees overall. And I think tying those two things together, making that a two-way conversation, really changes the dynamic of what a performance review looks like and feels like, especially when you tie that with the follow-up, which is so important. As we know with engagement surveys, it's not just about asking for input from your employees, it's then sharing what you learn and then talking about acting on it and what your plans are and then following through. So I think that's really powerful. I want to move us over into the next question because you did talk so much about managers, and that's really the topic at hand now.
Ashley, could I just throw something in on that last question? Because I love Deanna's answer. It was really at a very actionable level, which is powerful. And I think also, though, to that question is sort of at the strategic level, like first deciding what you're going to do. And I've been doing this work for over a decade. And what is so interesting is watching, as the question asks, organizations struggle and struggle and struggle to get it right. And I have this new theory that it takes you at least 3 times before you get to where Deanna is, where you actually get a solution that's working. And why is that? Well, it's because we compromise on the design. And there is, if you really lean into the science, there's like Daniel Pink, there's what science tells us and what organizations do. If we can step away from what organizations do and really lean into the science and what it tells us about what people want and what drives organizational performance, we can make better design choices. But it requires the courage to step away from really old habits that have been in our ecosystems for hundreds of years. Actually, you can go back centuries to the Ming Dynasty and find elements of the performance reviews in there. So it takes that courage to step away. And then you have to really get very clear about what are we trying to do here? Are we trying to give people a label, or are we trying to grow people to support the business of the future? And when you start to move into what's the future needs that we have as an organization, it completely changes some of the design choices you make and hopefully gives you the courage to go in a different direction. And so, I just wanted to add that had to happen, I bet, for Deanna's team before they got to where they were, was they made some bold choices to step away from some old ideas.
Yeah. And before I jump into our manager question, because what you just talked about is very relevant to a question we got from the audience. I'm going to pull one up from Natalie that says, when you think of implementation, and I think this also relates to your structural process and how you want to set up performance management, what are ways to get leaders and employees energized around your goal setting, around your process? Because you just said that, it takes some bold decisions and it takes moving away from compromise into what's right. So how do you galvanize your workforce and your leadership teams around the changes that you want to put into place?
I can jump in if that's okay. One thing that I've seen work is having top of the house at the organization announce the top level objectives, goals, KPIs, whatever you want to call them, and then cascade it down to the next level and ensure that leaders are having those meetings where they're talking about how do we drive the needle on this. And so you pull out what's at the top of what you can influence and then build it from there, then bring in the next level, and everyone's, I guess, using their voice in this conversation to say, this is what I can do to drive this. And ultimately, you get this powerful force moving everything in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. All right, let's jump into this manager question. We know that managers have been feeling the squeeze for quite some time. Many are experiencing high levels of burnout. We know that in reductions in force, often middle management is one of the key layers that gets absorbed into that riff. What are some changes organizations can make to make things more sustainable for your managers, to help them make their companies more effective, but also to create a pipeline for future managers who will continue to move up and drive your company and your team goals forward and help build that strong employee culture and experience?
Yeah, I'd love to jump in here because I'd love to make the connection between the previous question and this question, because I have some pretty strong opinions about performance management. Like Dina, I've been designing, redesigning, and evolving performance management for several decades. And I've seen, what doesn't work, and I've seen what does work, and everything in between. And I think that one of the things that we should do as HR practitioners is stop asking managers to do useless tasks. I don't ever recall managers getting super excited over the fact that we're going into performance management season. Yay, I have to do, performance reviews. I think that our performance management processes are often very process heavy with lots of steps, and we make them overly complicated for managers. We give them all of these unnecessary tasks that really don't have a lot of meaning at the end of the day and don't really matter. So I think we need to think about how we can make their lives easier and unburden them with the many, many, many tasks that we ask them to take on, and really focus on what truly matters, the moments that matter, right? And design processes, to Tamara's point about the design choices that we make, really think about what are those moments that matter, what is going to make the most difference and significant impact on the employee experience and really drive performance and productivity, career development and growth. And one of the things we need to do is ask managers, we need to ask them, what would a good performance management process look like to you? What would you like it to look like? And ask the same of employees. And when we gather their feedback and we include them in the design choices that we make, I think that we can help reimagine the role of the manager for them and for future managers. It's really helping to strip away the unnecessary tasks and focus in on what will make a big difference.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. I think being able to prioritize for managers, hearing back from managers, but then also helping them prioritize what are the high impact moments, what are the places to really spend your energy, because a manager's plate has so many different things on it, from keeping the work moving forward to developing employees to making sure that the right paperwork and content is complete and filled out. I think that's really powerful. I think it also ties really closely into employee development programs. When I became a first-time manager, I had a really strong manager program that walked me through a lot of different things around how to give feedback, how to have tough conversations, and I found it really valuable. By contrast, My brother, who's a chemical engineer, just moved into his first-time management role. And he asked his manager for, leadership resources, and he said that the company didn't have any. It's a large chemical company. So when we were talking, I was like, check in with your HR team. I'm sure there might be something, but I think those are places where, if you can bring in that training early and you can help create that conversation and feedback loop, that's another place where you're tying the whole conversation of employee development to performance management, both for the manager and for the employee. I'm wondering, Tamara, Deanna, do you have anything that you want to add to this question before we move on?
Yeah, absolutely. As practicing what you're preaching, that is something that I have absolutely put in place. And at one point, I worked at an organization that I was the HR business partner for a large sales division. And my focus was on how do we train 150 managers all at the same time, getting them doing the same things. And we became really deliberate with some of the meetings that they were going to. And I said, can we redesign this? I guess I was a sassy HR business partner. Can we redesign your meeting? And so we ended up creating something that we called leadership labs. And it was just in time training around key leadership skills, but also providing them with information on changes that were going on within the business. And ultimately, we became a feeder pool for the rest of the nation within our line of business. And it was a pretty sizable group of people, but people would leave our division and go become leaders in other divisions because we taught them the right things.
Mm-hmm. That is such a perfect segue into our next question, which is around skills and teaching the right things. And this is talking about soft skills or management skills, but there's also hard skills. We know that reskilling is top of mind for so many HR organizations. The World Economic Forum has an initiative to upskill 1 billion workers by 2030, which is a huge number. But many companies and many HR leaders that I talk to on a regular basis are still struggling with how to successfully build the right skills for their workforce, especially thinking ahead to the future. So I'm curious, what are some of the ingredients that companies need to bake this cake, to plan ahead and to manage this upskilling process effectively?
Ashley, I'll segue into that and even kind of try to close out the conversation a bit on managers, because I think that's such an interesting piece. I've called this for years what I call the manager dilemma, is we've promoted too many managers too quickly and not prepared them for the roles that they're in. And then we're disappointed that they're not wildly successful in their role. It's very cruel. To what both Tracy and Deanna has talked about, I think you have to think about clarity. What's the clarity of the role, and get rid of the crap that they don't need to do anymore. Like Tracy said, do they have the capacity? So the space, that's clearing the space, and then the capabilities. So how do you help build those capabilities? Well, we need to build manager capabilities, but we also need to build the capabilities of the organization, which is what you're asking about. One thing in that manager relief package can also be peer-based feedback, which you guys talk about a lot in the report, right? That you need to really lean into. We are a village. We are a community of people who can help lift each other up. And if we teach everyone in the organization, how do we engage in a culture of feedback that's about helping each of us and organizationally us improve, grow, and advance, we can completely shift the way we think about feedback and the way we start to build skills and to lean into that. So how do organizations fix it? Well, there's the very tactical work that needs to happen of defining, what are the capabilities and the skills we need, and creating an architecture and a framework that supports that and gives employees and managers information for how do I guide careers, how do I build skills, what skills are going to be valuable today and then tomorrow. There's been a few things in the chat that have talked about rewards, but the rewards conversation has to be in here. Are we going to become a pay for capability, reward for contribution company, which is one of the things I really work with organizations to shift to, so we can start to be pay transparent around skills and capabilities, so we can create a whole lot of information. And this is where your AI tools can certainly help do this, and your talent profile you talked about, where you're leaning into that to help to start to say, what do we need? What do we have? Do we have a good talent inventory? And then how do we give employees the voice to say what skills they want to build? And then we shift our world as HR practitioners to say, how do I help you do that? Okay, you want to go this direction. How do I help you do that? I'm a big move away from ratings person and move towards conversations that help me grow. So how do I shift away from calibrations where I'm arguing about 3s and 4s and move into conversations where I'm talking about talent growth? Ashley wants to build the skills. I don't have the capability to do that. Does somebody in the organization have a project she could do and help her build those skills? If managers started talking that way, we would start to really see a difference in the way we think about the growth of our people and our organization. And frankly, for our managers, talk about a lift. If I don't have to sit in a meeting and argue about why my person's a 3 and your person's a 4, which by the way, we actually as humans can't tell the difference, then I can now be talking about, I really want to keep Ashley. She's one of my best people. Help me help her. Like I need help to help her. And that becomes like, then I get juice because I'm helping you and you're getting something. And we're all starting to feel better about this place. And, performance management, it becomes growth management and it takes on a whole different way of thinking about it.
I really love that, shifting it from performance management to growth management as you think about how do you reflect back on what an employee has done, and then shift the conversation to how do we look forward to engage the employee and to grow the employee in order to align with our business needs and with what's going to engage them. I think that's incredibly powerful.
If I could just add one quick thing. So I worked at an organization where it was hard to find those stretch assignments. So we decided, how do we advertise our high potentials? And we had a high potential learning program, and one of the outcomes was to assign a business case. So it was a real business problem, and have different groups who were in the program go and solve this problem and be ready to present it back. And we provided them with mentors and coaches from within the organization. And when they presented in front of senior leadership, they got this feel for who is this person? What are they bringing to the table? And suddenly there was like, I want that person to work on this assignment with me. And we were able to generate some stretch assignments because we put the spotlight on the people so people could see their capabilities.
Yep. I think that's really powerful. This slightly ties into another audience question that I'm going to throw in here. It's related to performance reviews and the type of feedback. It came from Karen. Can we talk a little bit about the performance management conversations being both feedback for positive behaviors and results as much as corrective or constructive? The idea of performance management implies only negative when in fact continuous conversations reinforcing good behaviors and results is also impactful. And I think that ties into some of the things we've been talking about. What have you found in terms of helping shift that conversation to be more positive and growth oriented, or how do you help managers find that balance?
Well, I think, I think back over the years, some of the things that the organizations that I worked in, the teams that I led, some of the things that we did, started with the most basic thing, like taking the language, changing the language, shifting the language that we use to talk about performance management. And we would explain to employees and managers that we were not managing people's performance. We were looking to accelerate their performance, and simply shifting the mindset and the language that we use, the way that we talked about it, the way we thought about it. It was about, untapping or tapping into people's untapped potential, right? Helping them as individuals to grow. When they grow, we grow. And so really shifting the focus of what performance management was about. It wasn't about corrective behavior and negative and constructive feedback. It was about coaching, feedback for development, growth. And as individuals grow, teams grow, company grows, we all get better. So I think you can do kind of these simple things that you can start with to kind of just shift the mindset, shift the conversation, change the language, and then build from there.
I think that's really powerful. And something else that I've noticed as both an individual contributor and as a manager, the shift moving from like 1 to 2 points in time of performance reviews to some continuous performance management conversations is also really helpful, because you have more check-in moments to share that positive feedback. But you also create those check-in moments so you don't have unexpected news. So even if you have a performance review that's largely positive, if you do get a negative point of feedback and you only have these check-ins once or twice a year, that's going to overshadow the rest of the conversation. And so I found that lightens the pressure in those performance review moments to have continuous conversations and continuous check-ins and to share, here's where you really shined. It looks like these are skills we still need to continue to develop. Let's look for a project to really focus on those over the next 3 or 4 months. And then it's sort of it's a little bit less scary for the individual employee. And so I think this combination of like shifting and finding the right conversations and creating more space to have them is also really powerful.
That's right. Making it an ongoing experience. So we even would strip away the word process. It's not a process, right? Because process implies check the box activity that happens at certain points in the year. No, this is the employee experience. These are the ongoing conversations that managers and employees have with employees. And to your point, it creates less stress and pressure on those once or twice a year conversations.
Yeah. I'm going to pivot to our next question, which is a little bit around the technology to support these conversations, the tone of the conversations, the frequency of the conversations, enabling and lightening the lift for managers so that they can have more effective conversations and with the right information. When it comes to large HCMs and performance management, it's clear that based on our research and based on the performance enablement report, that performance is far better when it's handled with the integration of a purpose-based tool that has some of these bespoke nuances like a strong AI tool or a talent profile and things like that. But in our experience, many companies either seem to be complacent or satisfied with what they feel like they have already, or they're worried that because they've already made a large investment in their HCM, there's no appetite to consider another best-in-class tool to focus on performance management. I'm wondering, is there a different calculus that they should consider when it comes to investing in performance management software?
I'm happy to jump in. So I work in an organization where we're not using our HCM for performance. We're using, Betterworks, which is dedicated to performance management. And we did that really by design. And it was because we looked at what our HCM offered and also looked at 2 other systems, including Betterworks, and decided on Betterworks. And it worked really well for us. I think maybe just the hesitation from some organizations is, oh gosh, it's another system to manage. We found that when we took this system and moved it into the talent development space, it became a tool for us to be able to design things that I've never seen done in a performance management arena, if you will. And it's just making us, I'm the envy of my former coworkers, because I'm like, you should hear about this great tool I have, because I'm able to leverage 360s. I'm able to create things that are meaningful for specific managers and be able to launch it that way. And I think there's a lot of power in being able to deliver to managers what they're looking for in a way that's easy for them to use.
I think that's really powerful.
I also think if it's built into the program and it's already being paid for, often there's this hesitation of, well, why do we need something different if we already have something? We didn't have that issue. So that's why we were able to slide right on over.
So Ashley, I have a funny story. Years ago, I got a call from a very well-respected science and technology organization, and they were in a panic because they had bought taken their ERP or HCM system and turned on the performance management process, because before it had been a manual process. And your data talks about the manual wasn't any better than, well, in this case, the manual process was better because people could ignore it. And once they turned it on in the HCM system, it started sending all these prompts for doing all these things that people didn't like doing to begin with. It just caused this perfect storm of like, oh my gosh, this process is horrible, because it put it right in people's faces. And it goes back to that idea of not being really clear about what, if you're going to turn on a traditional model with all the traditional stuff, people are going to hate it. I mean, this data has been out there for, centuries on what happened. And what, when we first started doing research in this for my first book, we were trying to figure out how is performance management driving performance? That was the question we were trying to answer. And what we realized is performance management in its very traditional sense actually drives lower engagement. And so we can say it's probably reducing performance. I've had clients that tell me we go into a depression after we come out of performance reviews every year, every 6 months. So we had to turn that around and say, okay, we need performance management to drive performance. But you can't, that's what's so challenging about a lot of these big apps is that they're going to push you towards sort of the vanilla approach, which is the approach from 1972, and that approach is not going to be connecting to the workforce you have today. And so I think that's a lot of the problems is that it's kind of ties back to this inertia where we haven't changed, we haven't had the courage to really change to something different. So the big platforms kind of stuck with tried and true, so to speak. And I think that's where that can cause that great dissatisfaction because it isn't, as Deanna said, it's not custom built to what people are wanting. It's not creating an experience that's helping me. I'm getting value out of. It becomes a check the box. I have to go through these activities. And in the end, I have a label and I move on.
Mm-hmm. I think that's very true. I think if you look at, you do have something in place right now, you might find that you have a lot of feedback from your managers or from your employees or from your, team leaders when it comes to calibration that like they're frustrated by the process. They don't want to spend time on the process. They feel like it's time consuming without being, valuable and constructive and productive. And if those are the conversations that you're hearing or the feedback you're hearing, that is hard to quantify as an HR individual. But if you can pull together that qualitative data, you can start to build something of a case for why you need to move over to something else. And if you can layer that on with data insights to help demonstrate how this will help you inform your talent development programs, succession planning, other big critical questions like skills that you have to answer within your organization, that will also help build that case too.
Yeah, it's always a hard case because the data is clear. Like we know that engagement drives performance, engagement drives productivity. Gallup has decades of research that proves that to us. But sometimes convincing leaders that that's real and meaningful is difficult. But I think if you can A, do that, and then B, like you're saying, connect it to the strategic agenda, and particularly because of the skills issue, and people are wanting to know how are we going to fill this huge gap that we're still looking at as we look out into the future for the skills that we're going to need. If we can start to really connect it to strategy and our ability to thrive in the future and outsmart our competitors, then maybe we can start to move our leaders towards understanding why these investments are worthy investments, right?
Mm-hmm. I think that's really powerful. All right, we have one more question, and that might take us to the end of this presentation, or we'll try and fit in one more audience Q&A. This one is, doubling down on these tools. What are the right tools? What are things that are helpful for managers in these processes? And I want to talk specifically about AI because that is another hot button topic across every part of an organization, but also within HR. Enablement, we don't really cover AI in our State of Performance Enablement report, though we do have other resources about it. I'm curious, what are some of the approaches that you are taking or that you're seeing individuals at other organizations take to move forward with AI in an intelligent way? And I think I want to kick things off with Deanna, because I think you're doing some really interesting things in this space right now. As an AI software company, you're probably thinking about it in your own processes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you think about AI, you have to be careful, and that's if you're creating these instances for AI or if you're using it, that wherever you're getting it, that they've tested it. Because when you think about Chat GPT, for example, their data source is the entire internet. And so can you believe everything you read on the internet? And the answer is no, you can't. So when you're working with an organization, and I would say test it before you deploy it, you want to make sure that they've done their due diligence on having the right large language models, making sure that they've set it up in a way that when you're getting information, that it's reliable and that it's true. And so, for example, I'll just talk about Betterworks. we tested it by putting in I'll say some sassy comments. And I'll just give the example of one of, I should have your job. My back is killing me from carrying you all year, and watched what the AI did. And it actually took that and turned it into a really professional sounding response, because I know just from talking to others at Betterworks that there was care and deliberateness in the way that they created their AI experience so that it would be reliable and it would be safe. And we thought it was great. We were really excited to roll it out. And our team really, really embraced it and said, this is good stuff.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. I think as a manager, the most helpful tool that I've had in AI and performance management is when you have a performance management tool that summarizes previous feedback from peers and colleagues. That's deeply helpful, because the first step is just, having feedback, having information from your peers and colleagues to come in to summarize what it is that you've been doing. But if you have a really strong feedback program in place, you might have 12, 20, 30 pieces of feedback. And that's a lot to go through and sift through over a period of time. So having that summary at the very top, especially for a manager to be able to go into and then double click on to learn more if they need to, can be a really helpful starting place. It removes that, recency bias from the conversations. And then you can get into drafting, a more objective, piece of feedback or, response in a conversation, in a performance conversation. And then you can also layer in the AI to actually make that a little bit more professional, to reduce bias, to make sure that it's being delivered in a constructive and articulate way. So that's really interesting. And Michelle is jumping on right now. She's going to be joining us. She's been watching the audience Q&A really closely and has a couple more questions from the audience to share in while we have just one more minute.
Okay, so this first one is from Rachel. In keeping design choices simple, what are some thoughts around ensuring consistency in the employee experience? I find that some of the process-heavy design choices are to ensure there's equity in our approach.
I'd love to jump in on that one. I think you can still ensure equity in your approach without having a very process-heavy experience for managers and employees. And I think if you take a very holistic systems approach to performance management, and you look at how you're training managers to assess performance, how you're training them to give feedback, how you are training them to understand bias, and how bias can influence the way that they assess performance. If you can support your managers and build skills, those critical skills that they need to make the right talent decisions using the right data, your process does not need to have a lot of extra steps in it. That's been my experience.
That's amazing. And with less than 30 seconds, I just want to wrap up and say thank you so much to Tracy, to Tamara, to Deanna, and to Michelle for sharing your perspectives, sharing the research. I have learned a lot. I'm sure our audience has as well. And at this point, I just want to say thank you to our audience members. It's audience participation that really brings these to life. We've been able to pull in so many of your questions. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being present. Thank you for joining us and learning with us. And I hope everyone, here as presenters and as audience members, has a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.